back to my reversion. Unite the clans, I give thanks to each person. It's that same holy water that we immerse in. It's that same tradition that we all each versed in. United we stand and divided they win. They ignited in their plans and divided they sin. If you think about it and see us all for the same lands, their biggest fear is that we all remain friends. I got love for Team Marsh and y'all podcast. I got love for Michael Matt fans. Ryan Grant, Rick, Verity, Flanders, and Eric Sammons. Shout out to my boy, John Erickson. Avoid Babylon. I got love for Anthony and Rob Speak On. If you tried, you're persecuted the same for the weak heart. Our roots go way back before the Genesis, the Greek ark, sweetheart. Yeah, this a mass to the ages. Shout out to Bishop Athanasius, Father Dave Nix, Red Pill, we out the Matrix. Haters. Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. So tonight I have Jason with us. Anthony's going to be joining here shortly. But we wanted to get together to do a little discussion tonight on the Anabaptists. And this all really started with you in a chat that we're in, bringing up, who is it, Dan Carlin, right?
Yeah. So because I just asked the group if anybody had heard Dan Carlin's Wrath of the Cons, because it's one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. And then it was Anthony that had asked about this Prophets of Doom, which I had never heard of the rebellion at Munster until this, and it was really good. It was really fascinating.
Now Dan Carlin was he's a radio show host originally, I think, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure of what his background is.
Yeah, so he's not an actual historian, but he has this ongoing podcast called Hardcore History, I think.
Yeah.
And some of the history is I guess what you would get in kind of a public school, so it kind of tells the secular narrative we've heard, I don't know, my whole life anyways. But he does a really good job of storytelling, which I thought was awesome. So you said you really liked his one on the Mongols, right?
Yeah, and Dan does a really good job, because if anyone's not familiar with his podcast, his episodes aren't like an hour, 2 hours. I mean, you're talking about one episode can be 4 hours long, and he can do 5 or 6 in a series that are 4 or 5 hours long. But you never really lose interest in it, because he's good at what he does. But yeah, the one that I listened to was like I said, Wrath of the Cons. It was 3 or 4 part series. Like I said, 3 or 4 hours each. But and he just draws you into it, and did the same thing with this Prophets of Doom. Just really drew you into the story, and like you said, probably the first hour, and Anthony kind of warned us about it too. He kind of goes over just your generic anti-Catholic history that doesn't necessarily have the full picture of what was going on at the time. But afterwards, he seems to, and you had mentioned it to me on our chat, he gets into first sources instead of going secondhand, and then that's really when you start getting the history of what happened at Munster during the rebellion.
Yeah, exactly. The first hour of the show was a little hard to get. Through. Not so much he's entertaining to listen to. That's for sure. But as he was setting up kind of the historical background, it was definitely had an anti-Catholic bent to it. Not specifically so. He's not like a raging evangelical, anti-Catholic or anything. It's just the anti-Catholic perspective that you get from most history, anyways.
Yeah, but he definitely wasn't like trying to bash or come out against the Catholics. It was just that Enlightenment formed history.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Renaissance was this great humanist project fighting against the backwards medieval church and all that usual stuff.
Yeah.
But the last 3 hours of the 4-hour podcast covers like a year of time in the city of Munster.
Yeah, I thought it was yeah, I guess because yeah, it would have to be because the rebellion was a year anyway. But yeah, it was.
Yeah.
But yeah, he covers a year in that and does a very good job. And I know with me when I think of Anabaptists, I think of more of your pacifist and your stuff like groups like that, like your Mennonites and your Amish and stuff like that. And it was wild to me, wild to hear this story about these Anabaptists because they were on the complete opposite end of the spectrum by their end.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so yeah, you said you had never really heard of the Munster Rebellion prior to this.
No, I
I'd
hadn't.
I'd learned about it in high school as part of what they taught us about the Reformation. But what they taught us was, it was called, well, part of what they called the Radical Reformation. But other than just giving those Anabaptists the adjective radical, it didn't. It just made it seem as part of like the normal Reformation, right? Like they were just
Mhm.
another group of Protestants, which is probably kind of the perspective you had on the Anabaptist groups that you kind of know, right?
Yeah, so you're saying that they just came out of the general Reformation, right?
That's what we had been. That's what I
Yeah.
believe in high school. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my original understanding of the Anabaptists because again, I hadn't heard about this, but I also hadn't heard about the radical Reformation within the bigger Reformation. So that was an interesting rabbit hole as well.
What's up, Brick?
What's going on, Brick? My
Um,
man.
um, so what was? I guess before we get into like some of the details as to who they were and stuff, what was your biggest takeaway from the what we listened to from this episode from Carlin?
My biggest takeaway, man. Once I got past the shock of what was going on in Munster, it just really kind of, and I know this may sound cliche to some people that have maybe been Catholic their whole life, have been faithful Catholics, but it really kind of shows the importance of having boundaries and guidelines, right? And the Catholic Church sets those boundaries. A lot. Somebody told me during my conversion that the Catholic Church is like, say, when you're bowling and you've got the bumpers on the side, and it keeps that ball within there. The Catholic Church says you can explore all these areas within these bumpers, but once you start going outside, they're there to say, come on back in. I mean, that's of course outside of dogmatic teachings that you're required to believe, because there's a lot of things the church doesn't necessarily require assent to, right? But it just really showed how private interpretation can really get you in left field and can get you in trouble, to the point to where if you start thinking that this person has a special line to God, now you're in dangerous territory, because we've had cults like that here in recent decades. We had the Jim Jones, or recent times rather, not decades.
Right.
You had Jim Jones, you had of course Waco,
Heaven's
so on
Gate.
and so forth, Heaven's Gate. So it just really shows the need for there to be a higher authority that we all assent to.
Even and hi everyone.
Hi, Anthony.
I mean, you guys have no idea. You guys are so like calm and everything's like so organized when I'm not here. I jump on and mayhem starts.
You still don't have a light, even.
I can go like this. Is what I'm saying. Even so we started discussing this from the Dan Carlin podcast. Did you guys start saying that or no?
Yeah, we covered that.
Yeah. So like even him as a secular mediocre historian, as he labels himself that, like he says he's not a real historian, even he was able to recognize like this is what can happen when you don't have a pope figure to keep things, to have like an authority figure to say, look, you guys are going off the rails here, you can't do this.
Like, you need that magisterium.
These people, what wound up happening there was so outrageous. It was I remember listening to it, and even like, so when I told you guys to listen to it, like I said, you could probably skip the first hour because you get the classic cliche, like, the Bible was never written in the vernacular and all the nonsense like that you hear. It's like, that was obviously silly.
This is going great already. Anthony,
we can't hear you.
Anything. You're not muted.
Okay, so
it wouldn't be a show with us if everything went right.
No, but I mean, I guess we could just pick up, where we left off, because Anthony was making along the same lines about, you need that magisterium, the leadership of the church to keep you within the guardrail. So I guess let me flip the question back to you. What was your biggest takeaway when you think of this story?
For me, it was kind of connecting what I had learned earlier in high school. Because when they went over the rebellion in high school, it is really more, about a group of really just another group of Protestants that decided to take over a small town in Germany and got their butts handed to them by their local lord. And that's really all they talk about, other than, the guys being tortured in cages and the cages still hung up on the cathedral, which, if anyone saw the thumbnail for the video, that's what the thumbnail is of. It is of the cages that the three ringleaders that, after all was said and done, who were captured, tortured, and executed, those cages still hang from the cathedral today. But I guess my biggest takeaway was taking what I knew about it prior and connecting it to some things I've learned more recently, largely through watching Jeremiah Bannister, Paleocrat, if anyone's familiar. He went through this amazing book called Enthusiasm, and listening to Dan Carlin talk about Melchior Hoffman and John of Leyden and all these other.
This is gonna be rough. I'm gonna be getting phone calls every minute. You have no idea.
That's what that was. That makes sense.
Yeah, I got a phone call.
But listening to Carlin talk about these guys and some of the things they believed and things they did, like the polygamy they began to enforce, the crazy dreams they would claim from God, all these weird things that you don't hear about with Luther, with Calvin, with Zwingli, Knox.
No, but you do hear it. You do hear it from what's the guy we were talking about with Jeremiah the other night in the green room? That with the COVID thing, it was like, "Be gone, COVID."
Oh, you're talking about Copeland and
like Kenneth Copeland.
Yeah.
Well, right,
claimed to have those things happen. Like you
right, but what surprised me is how close those things that you hear from this John of Leyden and Melchior Hoffman were to earlier heresies, to like the Cathars, to even like the Montanists in the 2nd and 3rd century. Some of that things. It's like you come to realize that the Anabaptists, number one, weren't just your standard Protestants.
Yeah, no, Jan van Leyden actually claimed he heard the voice of God. And
so did Matthias before him.
Yeah,
and it's Melchior Hoffman even before them.
Well, see, and that's the danger of private interpretations on the Bible, right? Because you're going to have all these groups that say, well, we are guided by the Bible, but they all differ in how they view that. And, going what you were saying, Rob, even some of the Anabaptist groups trace their lineage back, or try to, at least, to the Waldensians.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And they weren't, and for a fact that these Anabaptists in Munster were not part of the larger Reformation. They were part of a smaller outbranching of that, because Dan Carlin brings up in the episode that even Luther writes a letter to them and says, "You guys are basically idiots. What are you doing?"
Yeah. Oh yeah. Luther and the other Protestants came down as hard on them as the Catholic Church did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was such a crazy time in Germany at this time because the whole thing was looting the church, right? Like that was the Reformation, was really just to loot the church. But then once you let the cat out of the bag, it's like now it's a free for all, and it's just every man for himself. And you get like, so you did have the mainline Protestant groups who did have some semblance of, I guess, like normalcy, but like you do get, I mean, you still get these crazy groups. I mean, that was
like,
what. God, what was that?
Nothing. Go.
Yeah, no, like you, even to this day, you'll get those crazy groups. Like, I mean, that's what Jonestown was. It was just a guy.
That's what Waco was.
Yeah. Yeah, the Waco
federal
that guy.
Well, yeah, well, the death of those guys was definitely shady as far as what the federal government, but the cult like brainwashing of the people.
Do you know where the what were they called? Just I'm blanking on it. Waco. They were the Branch Davidians.
Branch
Do you know what group they come from?
I do, but I'm drawing
from
a blank.
Seventh-day Adventists.
They are. Yeah.
Oh, right. Really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Seventh-day Adventists are kooks. They are. They're kooks.
But you're right, Rob. They are.
I work with a Seventh-day Adventist. That guy's a nut.
I want to know what he says about Catholics after interacting with you every day.
Honestly, I don't think he was like. I don't think he was so anti-Catholic though. Like most Seventh-day Adventists are adamantly anti-Catholic. Yep. He wasn't, because when I explained a few things to him, he was like, "Oh, that sounds like a like." I was actually talking to him about like confession and stuff, and he wasn't like so opposed to it. He understood like the logic of it. You know, I didn't explain it from a biblical standpoint. I tried to explain it from a logical standpoint, just the idea of unburdening yourself from sin, you know?
Actually, prepping from heaven there, I was going to make a point about that, because within the United States, there was another movement back in the early 1800s called the Restoration Movement. And out of that, again, came the Churches of Christ, Disciples of Christ, a Christian church called, I think the Brethren or Disciples or whatever. The Mormons actually, not Joseph Smith, but one of the main leaders ultimately of the Mormon church came from the Restoration movement in the United States. So they can in a way trace their roots back to it. Now they went way off, and it kind of brings me to something else that's interesting about the Anabaptists, because early on they were, I guess for the most part, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, pretty orthodox in their Trinitarian beliefs, but that kind of course fell by the wayside as people try to understand a divine mystery that can't ever be comprehended in human terms.
Well, you know, the definition of Anabaptists is that they don't believe in infant baptism. So that's really the one belief that all these sort of Anabaptist like groups can trace back to, right?
And they don't believe in the indelible mark, obviously, in the way that we do, because like Anabaptist means they were rebaptizing people.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, they don't have any sacramental system at all, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think if you surveyed most Anabaptists or Anabaptist leaning groups back in the 1500s, most are probably Trinitarian. You know, I don't know about some of the groups today. I don't know about Mennonites, but like the evangelical, because a lot of evangelical churches really are Anabaptists, but a lot of them also are Trinitarian, but some aren't. So there's really no set doctrine. It's kind of just a set of presuppositions, right? I mean, like you said, they're the one core presupposition they have is private interpretation. Yeah, in a way that Luther did not mean. Like Ronald Knox talks about here in the book. He says the real issue was not infant versus adult baptism, but something which cut much deeper. It was the question whether there should or should not be liberty of prophesying. When the Bible was thrown open to the survey of the ordinary lay Christian, the Protestant assumption was that everybody would be guided by the Holy Spirit to interpret it for himself in the right sense. All God's people would be taught of God. It must have been an awkward moment for Luther when he discovered that men who attracted a large public following in Germany were deriving their inspiration from the Bible and reading a great deal more into it than he did.
Mm-hmm.
Simple folk might read the Bible for themselves if they could derive any spiritual profit from the exercise, but their rule of faith was not, in fact, to be any private inspiration of their own. They were to be guided by the scripture as interpreted by Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and Beza and Knox. In other words, by the pundits. To describe this as the second generation of Protestantism is to admit that Protestantism dates back behind Luther. Luther's Protestantism, for the purposes of the enthusiast, was stillborn. So, I mean, that kind of gets to the heart of what you said. When you don't have anyone but yourself restraining yourself, things get crazy. Get nuts.
Yeah. And I see here in the comments, prepping from heaven, I talk, which I'm not sure if it's he or she, but they are right that a lot of the Protestant groups don't believe baptism is necessary for salvation, which ironically enough, again, that was something I was always taught in my Protestant days. But the thing I couldn't figure out about Anabaptists is, and maybe do they believe baptism is necessary for salvation?
I can't say for sure, honestly,
because I'm not sure what the Amish or Mennonites, and something that kind of blew my mind in research up to this. I don't even
think Lutherans believe it's necessary for salvation.
Yeah, a lot of Protestant groups don't. I know, but I don't know about Lutherans.
Well, I remember. I don't know what the official Lutheran teaching is, but I went to a christening for my niece at my wife's parents' church, and they were Lutheran. They were Missouri Synod Lutheran, and I remember the pastor giving a sermon saying, at first he was like, and baptism is necessary.
Well, actually,
I don't want to say it's necessary
because they are faith alone. They do believe in faith alone, so that would, of course, make sense that baptism is not necessary if you're faith alone. But
Haley says that she's almost certain they do not believe that it's necessary.
Yeah, I don't think they do, which is so strange because they call themselves Baptists. And the Anabaptists, it's like I've had arguments with Baptists who say that baptism is not necessary.
You're independent.
We're talking
fundamental Baptists definitely don't believe baptism is necessary. One thing I wanted to get going back onto the events at Munster was one thing I found interesting that even links from the apostolic age to even today. Is this, they renamed Munster, we're calling it the New Jerusalem because they were at the end of times. And even today within the Catholic Church, there's so much debate about we're in the end times, right? And it just seems like that's been a debate from the apostolic times, because even Paul in his writings, you could tell he was kind of writing about a sense we're at the end of times, right? But again, going back to what we said in the beginning of this, how did the Anabaptists at Munster get it so wrong and go so out into left field?
There's so many groups
because I'm just saying they felt they were at the end of times. They were a special group that were called to cleanse the world. And when you have that formula, that is a dangerous formula to commit heinous acts when you think you have that kind of license.
So, but you have to realize, Catholics are guilty of this too, obsessing on the end times. So are most Protestant groups. I mean, think about how many of those movies of Left Behind were put out, right? But even secular, non-believing people are obsessed with it, with the whole climate change thing. There's something in us that we all want to believe we're the last generation. I think people have a hard time accepting that the world's going to go on fine without them when they're gone.
Well, and it absolves you of all responsibility.
Yeah.
If it's the end, it's the end.
Well, Anthony, I'm going to steal Rob's question he asked, because we've both already kind of answered our question. What did you take out of this story of Munster the most?
How off the rails things can go without authority. That was really what I took from it, and it made me like it was one of the I got guys coming up. They're coming to talk to me. What's up, Gordon?
Walk out this side. He's almost done with that pass.
Okay,
I was gonna say mute him.
Yeah, mute him until you wait.
mute me.
So,
well, you were talking. I think it was you or Anthony talking about. I forget what exactly you said, but it made me think of this passage from the book. How when it comes to private interpretation, some of the crazy things really just come down to psychological impulse. Are you back, Anthony?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were talking about the authority.
Yeah, it's like if you don't have the authority to rein you in, which even, I mean, this guy was claiming that authority, right? So he was the people's authority. I mean, they thought, even Dan Carlin was like, well, maybe there was something in the water. The St. Anthony's fire was in the water because these people were acting like lunatics. Like it was almost like they were having group hallucinations. But it shows you the power of. It almost reminded me of the prison experiments. What was it? The Stanford prison experiment.
Yes.
It's like when you have a person in authority who is off the rails, you will go along with anything.
Yeah.
It was kind of wild how these people were going along with this insanity. Men were giving their wives over to them.
Eventually, and even before all the polygamy started in Munster, when they were killing each other and they were being starved out and all that, they were still apparently overtaken with joy because, like Dan Carlin mentioned, it was like Von Matthias or whatever his name. No, not Von. He wasn't a Van. Jan Matthias believed that he literally had a walk. He almost sounded like he was schizophrenic. Like he thought he had a walkie-talkie to God, basically. Yeah. Like he would have a conversation and he would turn around, basically talk to himself, turn back around, be like, well, God said this.
Now the question is, did he really think he did? Or was he just
Matthiasen is the one who, if you remember, he goes off alone, across no man's land, across the siege lines, to fight the archbishop's forces, all 10,000 of them, by himself.
Yeah, but he must have really believed it.
Yeah, well, he must have. But, I always kind of think that same question with these type of leaders. But then do they really believe what they're saying? But I think back to what Paul writes. I believe it's in the letter to the Thessalonians. But he writes, if you want to, I'm paraphrasing, but if you want to believe a lie bad enough, God will send you strong delusions that you may believe that lie. So it's like God.
Well, no. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. So you're paraphrasing that, but what that really is it's God's mercy is sending you chastisements. God's wrath is allowing you it's allowing you to have the delusions that you want. It's almost like I'm going to give you what you want instead of what you need is God's wrath.
And that's what I was going to clarify with it. It's not that he's necessarily leading you into error, but you are rejecting the truth with such ferocity that, hey, okay, his permissive will, I guess, if you want to say,
well, it's God's wrath at that point.
We'll let you go down that road.
He allows you to go off the rails because you've gone so far off the deep end that he'll allow for you to just. He won't send you chastisements to bring you back anymore. He'll just let you go off the deep end.
So my point being is that so I do believe that these people, a lot of them, did believe what they were doing. Ultimately, at the end, at least,
I think the followers did. The followers clearly believed them.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Without a doubt, it's a matter of did the actual guy.
Now Matthias, I believe that he did. Now, when you get to Van Leyden, I'm not so convinced that he actually believed all that. Now, he did end up going to die, but he was also under the false notion that an Anabaptist army was going to come and rescue him as well for a long period of time. But I don't necessarily believe that Van Leyden was a true believer like Matthias.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, and I hate to compare everything to this, but there's some real parallels there between that and, for instance, Adolf Hitler in World War II. Was he a true believer in the
Final
craziness he came up with? No, the man was a politician, and and
I
ultimately
don't like when people write Hitler off like he was crazy. He wasn't crazy.
No, but he also believed up till the last, almost the end, that somehow Germany could pull it off.
And the Germans weren't necessarily deceived like a lot of people think they were. They were
Right.
on board with what was going on.
Well, you had true believers like Himmler, for instance. Yeah, that's in case he falls in the water.
Mac, I'm working.
Because
I'm working a night shift.
Because like you mentioned earlier, Rob, Matthias went out to battle like 500 troops against 10. Matthias knew that, and I guess he looked at himself as like another Gideon or whatnot. But yeah, when you get to Van Leyden, he was, as the story progresses, he kept expecting, up until the end at least, he kept expecting an Anabaptist army to come and help them fight off the is it Prince Bishop or Prince Bishop? Right? Is it Prince Bishop?
Yeah.
Anyway, whoever was running that area in Germany, whatever his
title was.
Yeah,
It was a Prince Bishop. So now I didn't understand, was a Prince Bishop just a prince of the church, or was he a?
So
he was. Bishop?
It was an office in the Holy Roman Empire. He was an elector of the Holy Roman Empire. So he was a bishop, but he was a prince within that. Whoever was bishop held that see was a prince within the Holy Roman Empire.
But he had several kids as well, because I kind of looked up that, because I was curious about that as well, and it said he had like several kids as well, some of which came to be going to be clergy within the church.
So wait, were they? I mean, he wasn't married, right? With these.
I don't know.
I mean, at that point, the church had celibacy. It's not.
They definitely did at that point.
So I mean,
I don't
know enough about it.
Let me see. Let me look up his name, because I want to make sure that I'm telling the story right. Let's see.
Yeah, it was definitely a wild episode to listen to, and the reason it was so crazy is because it was from a. Oh, you know what? I gotta bail. I'll be back in a minute.
Okay. Yeah, it was a print. Yeah, the proper term is Prince Bishop of Munster. So his name was what was his name at the time? Franz von Waldeck. And it says that he was the son. Blah blah blah. Okay, so it says his marriage and issue. He met Anna Pullman. They lived a marriage-like relationship, having 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. So I'm not exactly sure what that means. Marriage. I mean, I know what they mean by marriage-like relationship, but I'm not sure how that falls within the sacramental nature of marriage, you know. But yeah, it said they. So let's see, 3 of his sons became clergymen.
Yeah, when you have 8 kids in that time period.
Yeah.
The younger ones usually did become clergy. So when you're talking about, or you and Anthony said how your biggest takeaway was what happens when you don't have any guidance or authority, and you had mentioned how we questioned whether or not Matthias and Leyden believed some of this crazy nonsense. And I thought Knox in the book here as a good section when he says it would have been well, I guess I'll start a little earlier. While the reformers, Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, were thus driven back on pure scripturalism, the Anabaptists, who were no less careful students of the Bible in their own way, continued to believe that prophetic inspiration was granted them to understand the word of God. Revelation to them was progressive and not static. So it wasn't just that they, believed in private interpretation of the Bible. They thought they could still receive new revelation. But it would have been surprising if such claims to the prophetic gift had not resulted in some irregularities of conduct. Knox is so underspoken sometimes, it's hilarious. Irregularities of conduct. Well, they're to polygamy and
Yeah, I mean, just
all this
irregularity. Yeah,
irregularity
irregular
of conduct.
Yeah, that's
While there can be little doubt that the ordinary run of Anabaptists, like your Amish and Mennonites, were people of simple and somewhat rigid morality, we can hardly conclude that the scandals which attach to the memory of the sect date entirely from the last days of Munster. History abounds with warnings that the mystic who follows his own guidance without any check from outside may easily mistake the stirrings of his own unconscious self, even the baser of them, for inspirations from on high. All the more so when a doctrine of perfectionism is popular, as it seems to have been with some of the Anabaptists, and men come to believe that they themselves are actually incapable of sinning. So that's another one of those beliefs that goes back to like the Waldenses and the Cathars and these earlier heretics that they believe that they, even if they do something which to most normal people would be a sin, they themselves are perfect and can't sin, right?
Yeah, when they talked about the polygamy that started happening under Van Leyden, I thought during that segment of his show, I remember thinking back, from what I gathered of how Jan Matthias was, he would have never have gone for that nonsense. But again, I think he was a true believer, where Van Leyden was in it for himself, because he eventually makes himself king. And Munster, for all intents and purposes, becomes a communistic state, because they have to keep their doors open and subject to regular checks. And while the people were starving and losing weight and being very malnourished, the people at the top, like Van Leyden and Knipperdolling and them, they were being well fed and all that, and that's how communism always works its way out.
Yeah, I mean, as Catholicism for the Modern World says here, on the one hand, Anabaptists say they want to separate from the church from the state.
Yeah.
But then the Anabaptists in Munster established a theocracy in Munster.
Yeah, they did.
And Knox actually has something to say about that. He says, "You're a true ultra supernaturalist," which describes Anabaptists pretty well, "has no quarrel, properly speaking, with the state as a pagan institution." That's how they see the state. They see it as pagan. It may exist for all he cares and legislate for its own pagan subjects. Meanwhile, he will conform to its laws scrupulously, though under protest. That describes the Mennonites pretty well.
Yeah, well, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say they don't agree with the modern state, especially America, but they obey American laws.
Neither do we.
Well, no,
yeah.
but
I know what you mean.
But I bet they follow the speed limit. Well, that's probably because of the horses.
Yeah. But so I wrote down here that as far as some of the Mennonites' core beliefs is from, and I'm probably going to butcher the name, and I apologize, the Schlittenheim Confession. One of the things is the points they make in it is separation from evil, which they call the world. So they need to have the separation. But the Amish, of course, take that, what we think of the horse and buggage and stuff like that. But the Mennonites are a diverse group. Some do, some don't. And
there's some stricter versions. And
I wouldn't have never have guessed it until today when I was looking up some of the Mennonite beliefs, right? There are groups within the Mennonite church today who bless same-sex unions and who are quote-unquote inclusive of the LGBT community, which I would have never have guessed in a Mennonite group.
Yeah.
But then again, knowing what I know about the Anabaptists, I would have never have guessed a story like Munster would have happened. Yeah. If you would have asked me last week before we talked about this, hey, there's some Anabaptists who were murdering, set up a theocracy, a communist state, were polygamy and all this stuff, I would have said there's no way, because when you think of Anabaptists and these groups within them, you think of pacifists.
Yeah. Well, so Knox goes on to say that living under the state's rules is simply doing its best in an imperfect world. The Anabaptist, believing himself to be already in some sense perfect, could not find himself at home in an imperfect world or an imperfect state. He fell back on non-resistance and on a kind of passive citizenship, like you were describing the Mennonites and Amish withdrawing from the world. But he says, but all the time, the Anabaptist dreams were of a theocracy. Critics of the movement point to the non-resistance doctrine preached by many of the Anabaptists as inconsistent with the bloodthirsty history of the Peasants' Revolt or with the butcheries committed by John of Leyden. So long as he is living within the confines of a state governed by worldly men, according to the dictates of carnal wisdom, in which of our states is not, the ultra-supernaturalists, the Anabaptists, for all intents and purposes, outlaws himself morally from its constitution. When once a theocratic state is set up under a perfect ruler, or an army is in the field marshaled by perfect generals, there is danger that he will be not less, but more bloodthirsty than is the common want of normal men. So I think Knox is saying that not that the Anabaptists in general or others like them are truly pacifist or truly withdrawn from the world. I think he's saying that they're withdrawn from the world when they have to be, but if they ever are given a chance, like in Munster, to make what they see as a perfect society, they become fanatical.
Yeah, and I don't think it wasn't to the extreme, but there were definitely some very bad things that happened. But if you look at the Puritans in the United States when they came over and they were trying to set up communities that were that met the Puritan standards, but were also very anti-Catholic, passing laws and stuff like that. So they weren't very charitable to that. So it's again, this is just seems like the beginning of a long line of people that came after them, or maybe even before them, that said, we've got to set up what we consider a perfect society. And then ultimately it never goes as you plan.
Yeah. Catholicism for the modern world here brings up another point that's made in this book here. The Mennonites and earlier Anabaptist groups believe that Jesus had celestial flesh, meaning he avoided original sin by not taking on the flesh from Mary. And that's another thing that really differentiates Anabaptism in its later streams from mainline Protestantism. I mean, Lutherans don't believe in the Immaculate Conception, of course, but they do see Mary as the mother of God, of Jesus, but also of God. But some Anabaptist groups don't even see Mary as the mother necessarily of Jesus, the man.
Well, I would say that, or I would assume that Mennonites don't even believe, because I saw the comment on here, don't even believe in original sin because they reject infant baptism. So if you reject original sin, well, then the natural conclusion is, well, infant baptism is unnecessary, right? So but yeah, no, they do. Yeah, the celestial flesh does sound very Mormonish, and I know me and you have talked to people. Seems like recently, on every time around a feast of Our Lady, we talk to some kooks who want to bash Our Lady, and we even talked to somebody here recently that did claim that Jesus wasn't the mother of Jesus, that that he didn't take her flesh or whatnot. I mean, there's just all kind of, and I think all these insane ideas come up because because for whatever reason you reject the truth of the Catholic Church. So in order to counter that, you have to come up with some nonsense in order to make your sect seem viable.
Right.
Like you do, which brings me like Gnosticism, like you have some special knowledge that Christians didn't have for 1,500 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, it all comes back to private interpretation, and not just, and even more than that. I mean, groups like the Anabaptists and other these groups, they think they have the inner light, right? That the Holy Spirit guides them day to day, and of course the Holy Spirit guides all of us day to day, but that I don't know
In
how
a special way.
right, in a different, in a way more than you would think.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another guy. But
What was besides the whole violent tendency of the Munster rebellion, what was the one belief or action described in this episode by Dan Carlin that surprised you the most from what you knew of Mennonites and such?
Well, it's going to be the polygamy, and I'll tell you what stood out to me the most about that is that during the episode, he's talking about when Van Leyden and Nipperdali and all them are getting together, and they start. He tries to push Van Leyden tries to push this idea of polygamy. The justification was, well, David and Solomon had all these wives, and God loved them. So if God loves us, why can't we have all these wives? And I remember thinking, because Jesus literally said when he was here, marriage is between one man and one woman for life, like from the beginning.
Like, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, like I'm sitting here going, like, if I'm one, and again, if you're in this group, you would think at least one or two would be like, okay, like Jesus literally refutes you on this point, But as far as we know, no one did, and nobody did until it was their daughters that had to start getting married off to Van Leyden and all these other people, and then there was a rebellion within the rebellion that didn't last very long, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's not too many, besides your Mormons, there's not too many polygamous groups in the, well, then again, Mormons aren't even remotely Christian, but there's not too many polygamous groups that call themselves Christian today.
Yeah.
I understand after what happened in Munster, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like it's clear as day. Even those that don't agree necessarily with divorce and remarriage, the teachings of Jesus on that will at least acknowledge that you're not allowed to have multiple wives. and it even says in the New Testament that God overlooked these times of ignorance, but now he calls all to repentance. So yeah, there were things that were allowed in the Old Testament that God didn't necessarily want to happen.
Well, right. Christ says that it was allowed, Moses allowed it due to the hardness of their hearts.
Yeah.
Basically, you idiots weren't going to accept Moses otherwise.
Yeah. So, but now he calls you to repentance, to conform to his will. And again, the polygamy is another reason I don't believe Van Leyden was a true believer. I think, again, he made himself king. He enacted this polygamy. He was in it for his carnal desires.
Yep. Well, and there, what was interesting to me, at least the way, it was told by Dan Carlin, because of course I didn't read any of these sources. So I don't know, but the way he told the story of, so John of Leyden, of course, said he had visions and communication directly from God. I mean, literally, he could be talking to someone and be like, "Whoa, hold on."
The phone's ringing.
Okay, God just told me. That's the way Dan Carlin made it sound like.
Right.
But he's, I forget the situation. John of Leyden was in some sort of bind. The people were starting to not seem to trust him, or there's some sort of problem, right?
Right.
And suddenly this nobody comes up and says, "Oh, I had a dream directly from God last night, and it happened to be exactly what John of Leyden needed to get out of this bind." I mean, to me, it just seems so politically orchestrated.
Yeah.
Is that how it sounded to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, he wasn't like a true prophet. So, I mean, in order for him to prophesy what was going to happen, he would have to know. And also with Van Leyden, he, he sure was a turncoat against Matthias as well, because as soon as Matthias, so for those that don't know, the killing of Matthias was very gruesome. They basically killed him in the field of battle and outside the walls. Didn't take very long, I'm sure. It was
Well, 'cause it
500
was-
against 10, yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Chopped up his body in front of them, put his head on a I guess pike or whatever, and then took his man area and nailed him to the door of the city entrance, I guess. So most sane people would be like, "All right, we're done, dude.
done.
We're done.
We're
We're
out."
done." Van Leyden gets up and goes, "No, Matthias was being punished by God. So, but God has come to me and told me that I am to lead you people." Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but that was the gist of the conversation. And then he had, of course, Nipper Darling and them supposedly back him up. And Matthias had also married a nun, who had left a convent to marry him, and she was supposedly up there saying, "Yeah, Matthias was wrong." So it's not like they had each other's back that well.
No. And this was, I mean, like you said, this was after Matthias went out into battle because he believed God told him to go out with only 10 bodyguards, more or less,
Yeah.
and that he would defeat this army of 10,000 battle-hardened mercenaries. and these Anabaptists weren't soldiers.
No.
Matthias and Nipperdalling was what? Some sort of banker or
Yeah,
merchant. He was a merchant.
Yeah, and who ended up being a
Matthias-
mayor of the town before the rebellion.
Right. Matthias, I think, was a basket weaver. John of Leyden was an actor and tailor. I mean, but yet this guy thought he could go out with 10 other nobodies surrounding him and beat an army of 10,000.
Yeah.
And he thought God told him that. And yet when he gets slaughtered, his second in command says, "Oh, well, God told me that he wasn't going to make it because he didn't really believe it."
Yeah.
It's like the Jew just went out there and took one for the team. You're right. They were the backstabbing. I mean,
Well, and if I'm sitting inside the walls, I'm like, okay, this is going to be the test if I'm on the right side. Oh, he lost. All right, I'm gone.
I'm out. Well, and they do talk about the defections that started to happen
Yeah.
more and more, and
well, I guess because of some of the incompetence too on the side of the Prince Bishop,
Yes.
like if you're okay, so if you're inside Munster, you're one of these Anabaptists, and all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of drunk mercenaries who thought the sunset was the sunrise and they attack early and you defeat them. Well, I can see how that's going to encourage you to think, dude, we might be on the right side here. What I believe God is supporting this because we just defeated this army.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know or aren't aware, like this time period, there were no standing professional armies. There were no even like mass conscripted citizen armies. It was all mercenaries, especially in the Holy Roman Empire. So the Prince Bishop hired, multiple bands of mercenaries led by different mercenary captains to besiege, the town of Munster. And like Jason said, they weren't all the same quality of men. Some like their drink a little bit more than others. And in a planned attack that was supposed to happen at dawn the next morning, one group of drunken mercenaries thought the sunset was the sunrise and attacked early and started the attack, and they had to try to do it in the middle of the night, and they got defeated. But
yeah, Yeah, I mean that it didn't quite happen like that again, but yeah, they did get pushed back one or at least
What
one time, maybe
one
maybe
other?
two more. Yeah,
Yeah, one at least one other subsequent time, definitely.
yeah. So
Um,
I guess if I'm on the other side too, I can see how some of these guys their confidence was getting built, but I don't know. After Matthias, I would have personally, hopefully at least, been like, dude, I'm out.
well, and if it wasn't after that, then after John of Leyden wanted, you know, your buddy to marry your daughter as his
Yeah.
third wife, that's probably which
Well,
that did start a revolt, but
yeah, and let me ask you, what were you thinking when you heard during that like so when some of these guys rebelled against Van Leyden and they captured all the leaders and they just sat on them arguing about what to do with them. I mean, were you just screaming in your head like, "What are you doing?"
it's like suddenly you guys aren't bloodthirsty.
Or
Like
yeah,
after everything you've done up to this point,
yeah. I mean, at least throw them outside the walls.
yeah, give them over, like use them as a. But I think that shows you that these people largely really did believe.
Yeah.
If they didn't believe that the world, because it all started with Melchior Hoffman saying the world was going to end in Strasbourg, but it didn't. But then John Matthias comes to Munster and say the world's going to end in Munster, right? So I think it shows these people really believe that the world was going to end at Munster and they had to be there to be saved. Otherwise, why not give John of Leyden over to the Prince Bishop as a peace offering?
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit on the story, but something else that was interesting about the story as well was the girl, the 15-year-old girl, I think 15 or 12, whatever she was. She was
15, 14.
yeah, she was a teenage girl, yeah, which was such a believer that she was willing to go to the Prince Bishop with a shirt that she had laced with poison and was going to kill him with it.
Yeah.
But because of some defections, the Prince Bishop already knew about it and ended up torturing and killing the girl because of it. But I mean, yeah, these real, I know kids are impressionable, but how many kids at that age are you going to have willing to make a sacrifice like that and in something they don't really believe in,
And even worse, how many adults would ever let someone do that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Granted, I know it was a different time and adulthood and the age of adulthood was looked at differently, but well, we're coming up in an hour. So I guess the two questions I have for you. One, so I named the episode Anabaptists, Radical Reformers, or Medieval Heretics, or Medieval Prophets of Doom. Now that from what you had known before and from listening to this episode by Dan Carlin, how do you see them now? Do you see them more as just kind of a radical branch of Protestants from that time period, or do you see them as something entirely different? And then the second question. So I think what most of the people in the town of Munster were killed. So these people, these leaders got 10,000 people slaughtered, let alone the soldiers that had to fight them. So Leyden and Nipperdalling, and I forget the third one.
Wow, you guys
But
still going, huh?
We're just finishing up now.
They just in time.
But they're tortured and executed at the end. Do you see that
our
as
audience?
justified? No.
I was kidding.
Okay, so yeah, just real quick about because you brought up the torture part at the end, and how I won't go into details, but these guys were brutally tortured and killed, and it was like they had to be tortured apparently for an hour. If you pass out, your time stops. It's not like
yes, they
not
put
like,
time back on the clock.
Yeah, it's not like you pass out. You're like, oh, good, 45 minutes passed. It's like no, you've still got. But they said Van Leyden didn't let out a scream or anything like that, but that Nipperdalling tried to hang himself on his rope. He was so terrified.
So they did one at a time, and the other two were sitting right there feeling and listening to it happen. So Leyden went first, and
Well, they were back to back to each other on that.
yeah, right, on this post.
Yeah, and they basically got the tongs hot and started ripping his flesh from his armpit down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what did you guys actually think of it? Like, did you guys enjoy the podcast itself?
Oh, it was great.
Yeah.
I mean, he does a couple of really, really good ones. That one just happened to stand out to me.
So I know. So Rob
You
had
watched
asked.
the Genghis Khan one, right, Jay?
Oh, I love the Genghis Khan one. Yeah, that's my favorite one. So Rob had asked me, did I still, if I remember right, Rob, you said, do I still view Anabaptist in a just general Protestant Reformation or more in the radical camp?
Oh, they're definitely radical.
Do you view them as just more radical Protestants from that time period, or do you view them as, something entirely different? Like Prophets of Doom, like
I see them as
weird medieval heretics. Yeah.
Well,
I guess how do you view them with everything you know now?
So the Anabaptists, I still, in general terms, just because it seems like the events in Munster and the Anabaptist movement, at least unless there's another story like this, was more the exception than the norm within the Anabaptist movement.
Were there other Anabaptist movements?
This ended it. There's according to Knox here, the Anabaptism really as a movement went from 1520 to 1535 to the executions in Munster. There are groups like the Mennonites and such,
and that's what I'm referring to as far,
but they to varying degrees try to separate themselves from Anabaptism.
Yeah.
So prepping for heaven. Now, what I'll say is the first hour you're going to hear the typical. Listen, he's trying to play a safe role, right? He's trying not to upset everybody, because if he goes and he tries to defend Catholicism too much, he'll get, he'll catch it from the Protestants. Because
it's your standard history.
Yeah. We talked about, me and Rob had mentioned that in the very beginning, how there's a very Enlightenment period type.
Yeah. So the first hour, that's what you're dealing. But he does do a good job of setting it up, and he does.
I would say still listen to the first hour.
Yeah, me too.
Just know you're going to hear your typical tropes.
Yeah, so like when you guys were we're listening to it, you guys would throw a message, you're like, oh boy, eye roll. But I said, like, you really could skip it, but I think he does a good job of setting the stage for the time period of what you're dealing with. And it's once he gets, I think it's about the hour and 10-minute mark where he starts talking about the two, was it not the two Jans, the other two,
Melchior Hoffman and
Hoffman
there's
and Rothman.
Yeah,
because you also have Bernard Rothman.
Yeah, you wind up getting to about an hour and 10 in, and he starts bringing these characters in and explaining who they are and what they do. If you guys have the time, definitely listen to. I keep saying watch, but it's a podcast. I bought it on iTunes, so it's actually like
it's only $2.99. It's not expensive.
I bought it too,
and it's a 5-hour podcast. I mean, it's not. Yeah. You're getting 5 hours of entertainment for $2.99, but it was. I mean, I couldn't stop listening. When the first time I heard it, I was like, this is the craziest story I've ever heard. Now Dan Carlin does an amazing job on the Genghis Khan thing. That's a few parts, that one, right, Jake?
That's
Jason?
3 or 4. That's 3 or 4 episodes.
It's like
12
phenomenal. Hours, you're saying.
Yeah. He also did.
So I actually listened to that because I used to have to drive between where I lived in Casper to North Dakota. So I would listen to that stuff all the time.
I know what I'm doing then on the drive to Steubenville.
There you go.
Yeah, well,
I'm going to buy that
also,
series.
There's one on the Ghost of the Ostfront, which is the eastern front of World War II between Russia and Germany.
Yeah.
That one was amazing. Then he has one on the Native Americans that was really good.
World War One. He has one on World War One.
World War One was. I never knew about like the whole Franz Ferdinand thing. Really, like
he also has one on Japanese history and it's very good as well. I mean, all his stuff is pretty good that I've heard. I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, but these are the one I've heard some that I kind of lost interest in. The Genghis Khan one is phenomenal. Ghost of the Ostfront is amazing. So Rob, if you got 16-hour ride to Steubenville, I would do Ghost of the Ostfront. That was good. Or the World War One, because if you don't really know
I know so much about those two topics. I would
all
be
right,
really
so then I would do Genghis Khan.
Genghis Khan. Now, is it just Genghis Khan or is it the whole Mongol Empire?
It's the Mongol Empire up until like he dies, and then his generals break off. But a lot of it is with Genghis Khan. And what amazes me about that episode is even in the Middle East, because throughout history the Muslims didn't necessarily fear people greatly. They were terrified of this man.
Well, listen, the Mongolian Empire is bigger than any empire in history.
The largest contiguous land empire in history. Yep.
In history. I mean, it's bigger than the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Babylonian Empire. It's humongous.
Well, that
the amount of ground this guy covered.
In today, it would be 10 million people in the world are descended from Genghis Khan. 1% of the world's population has DNA from Genghis Khan.
I thought it was more than that. I thought it was more than
I know it's either 1% or 10%.
Yeah,
I think it's 1%.
It's at least 1% of the world's population has his DNA because he raped that many women.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's we should maybe think about doing a podcast on that once you listen to, because I'll listen to it again.
Yeah.
16 hours.
Maybe we'll do it at the Steubenville and we'll listen to it on the Roger Steubenville.
Do it live.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's like, what is our channel? It's like, I don't know. We just talk about stuff.
Well,
right?
and
it doesn't always have to be Catholic content. We could just talk about history if you want.
Well, it'd be. Sorry. Go.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, just because a history we talk about doesn't include many Catholics, I think it would be cool to bring a Catholic perspective to all history, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So
and I love history. I always joke that I got a minor in history by accident in colleges because all my electives ended up being history courses. And my advisor
if you get a good history teacher, you love it. It's great.
And my advisor said, you have enough credits for a minor. Do you want to apply for one? I was like, yeah, why not? But anyway,
what can you do with that?
Nothing. So getting back to this episode, because we were closing up on it. What were y'all's thoughts on it? Because I know you'd asked two questions, Rob, but I'll be honest, I don't remember what your second question was.
The second question was the one you answered first. It was the execution justified? Oh no, my first question was.
I think the execution was justified. Now I cringe at the way they were executed.
I agree. They definitely deserve death for what they did, but I think they took too much enjoyment in causing that death slowly. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, their executions were brutal. They basically flayed them.
Yeah. Now I don't disagree that they deserve that. I don't think it should have been done to them, though.
Yeah. Just send them on to their maker and let their maker decide.
Yeah. What's interesting? Well, Dan Carlin didn't mention it, and I don't know if any of the sources that are out there do. Did Dan talk about them any of them reconciling with the Catholic Church at all prior to death? I don't think he mentioned it one way or the other, did he?
Mm-mm.
No, I don't think that was even an issue for him, though.
Well, right. That's what I want to know, though.
Yeah.
And the cages that they were hung in, I didn't know this because they're, like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, they're still hanging at what is it, St. Lambert's Cathedral in Munster.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the bones of the body stayed in the cages for 50 years before they were removed. Yes. But then the steeple was rebuilt in the late 1800s, so they had to rehang them. And then after World War II, because of some of the English bombing on them, they had to either take them down or rebuild the steeple. But something I found kind of funny was a comment was made. Oh man, these cages are really sturdy, the way they were built. And I was like, mate, they don't make them like they used to.
No, they don't. Did you guys watch the Luther documentary that came out last year? It was in German, I think. But there was a great Luther documentary that came out. I watched it. I totally forgot about it, but it was so good when it came out. Church Militant was promoting it, and that's why I saw it. Not that I would, whatever with them, but like they were promoting it, and it was a really good documentary on Luther from a Catholic perspective, just showing how diabolical the whole Reformation really was on his part. I'll have to check that one out again. I remember being on Vimeo. I had to buy it on Vimeo or rent it. I'll try and find it. I'll try and find the name of it, and then see if maybe we want to watch that one and talk about that one. Next time we do this, I'll try to not be at work. Because this was rough. I wanted to be with you guys so bad.
Well, the podcast was your recommendation, and
I
then
know,
doing a show
was
your recommendation on it.
I'm sorry, man. Thank you guys for holding it down, though.
Look at it this way: tonight is the first time you're getting paid to podcast.
That's true.
It's just not through monetization.
I'm making good money today.
Now, what you ought to be afraid of, Anthony, is I thought me and Rob meshed really well together. So you and Mark might need to be scared.
It was serious. It was well thought out. It was scholarly. It was probably boring as hell.
You know what? You guys are well thought out, scholarly. Go watch the Tradman podcast. Don't watch ours, all right?
Yeah, with Mark over there going, oh yeah.
I got to
those are a couple scholarly gentlemen right there.
That last episode was really good that you and Mark did, Jason. Not the one with Angela. For that, I haven't seen the one with Angela yet. I haven't had time.
Oh, the
you
one
talking
with
about
the
the Light of the East?
Yeah.
Mark gave free law advice on that one. I don't know how we got off on that tangent, but we do sometimes. Tomorrow we're actually going to be discussing doing an episode with Jeremiah from the Paleocraft. So I'm excited about that.
Oh,
that is
because Jeremiah is a very interesting person to talk to.
Did you know him before we introduced you to him?
Not in person. I had started to see a little bit of his work, but I had never talked. I remember the first time I ever met him, I wasn't actually on the show. I was in the comments, and I teased him about the wrong color of his headset because I was like, "Hey, Christmas is over. We're in Lent. We need to have purple."
Right?
Yeah, but no, Jeremiah is.
He's a great broadcaster, man.
Yeah, he does a great job of his content, and he's a wealth of knowledge.
Haley says Haley's right. We should have tried to get him on this episode. I mean, I've only ever heard about this book because of Jeremiah's
I'm going to read that
series.
book. I'm going to read that book because of Jeremiah.
Do you want me to bring it? Do you want me to bring you my copy?
Which book?
Well, I'm going to order a copy because I want to have one at the house.
Enthusiasm, a chapter in the history of religion.
Yeah, he's just easy to talk to. There's never he was one of the easiest people to have on the show. He just has such a wealth of knowledge. It's just it's such an easy conversation to have.
Well, he has a wealth of knowledge, but it's not like when you talk to some intelligent people, you kind of feel like you're below them. Or whatever, he's very personable. It's like, okay, I could sit down, have a beer with this guy, talk to him, invite him over for family dinner, would get along great,
definitely. Yeah. Well, all right, boys, I'm gonna run because I'm still getting people bugging me and asking me to. I'm supposed to be running a job with like 18 guys right now, but
okay.
I apologize, dude. I'm so sorry. I wish I was here for this whole thing. I would have loved to be here for it.
It's okay. We'll edit your parts out. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, they won't even know you're here.
That should probably be much better. All right, guys. Thanks. Man.
Have a good night, man.
Yes.
Oh, that's not how I get it.
At least he didn't kill the stream like some people on phones.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
I don't have a word to come back for that.
No. Did you have anything you wanted to promote before we're done?
No, just like I mentioned earlier, I'll probably take this episode, just cut an intro and put on our channel as well because I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's a very interesting story. So I just released an episode today with Angela Erickson. She has a podcast, as you know, but for any listeners, Integrated with Angela Erickson. We talked to her about pregnancy centers. I would say crisis pregnancy centers, but as we learned in the show, that's kind of an outdated term. They're just pregnancy centers now. So that was released today. Very good episode. She's a phenomenal guest, wealth of knowledge, especially in the pro-life movement.
Yeah, she's a pro with that.
Yeah. And I'll probably release the episode, or Mark, one of us will release the episode with Jeremiah maybe in a day or two after we record it. And then let's see, next week I hope to get our first series out on the different churches. And
which church you doing?
Oh,
first?
sorry. Yeah, I forgot. My brain doesn't transfer what I'm thinking. So yeah, we're doing a series on the different churches within the Catholic Church. So small C within the big C, like your different rites, your Byzantine rites, your Alexandrian rite, and stuff like that. So for people that don't know, there are, depending on who you talk to, 24 different churches within the Catholic Church. Most of them are in the East.
23 of the 24.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about those, and I hope to we did an introduction last week on what we hope to cover in the series. We will hopefully put out the first episode in that series next week. And then I am also planning on next week to talk to a friend who is involved in the Colby prison ministries, who I've been a part of 2 or 3 times in the past. And they're really trying to live the message of, visit those in prisons that Jesus, talks to us about. I believe it's in Matthew 25, maybe. But anyway, I think it's a good ministry. It does good work. So I'd like to get him on to kind of advertise for those Colby prison ministries.
Haley wants to know if Angela was the first woman you interviewed for the show.
Yes. So not yesterday's episode. We interviewed her a while back when we first met her. We had some audio issues with Riverside, but since then we've had Amanda Lahr on, who's a Catholic author. We've had Angela, and I can't remember if we've had another female on or not. Yeah, so it is a man podcast, but people ask us, how did you come up with the name? And we're like, look, we're not that creative. We just
no deep meaning.
We just attend a traditional Latin mass. We hold more traditional values, and Mark was like thought of Mad Men, so he was like Trad Men. And before we put our first episode, he's like, hey, if you want to change the name, I have no problem with it. I said, dude, I can't think of anything else. So but before, every time we've had a woman on those first couple episodes, at least when we had a woman, we made the comment, even though we're trad men, we aren't against our female Catholics.
Cool. So. I think Anthony and I might stream sometime this weekend about the Shia LaBeouf interview, not with Bishop Barron, but he did one with I don't remember his name. He did one on a podcast called Real Ones. I don't know if you're familiar with that podcast at all, Jason.
I know the Hot Ones, right? The one where they eat the wings. I'm not familiar with the Real Ones, no.
I forget the name of the actor who does it, but he was he was an actor with Shia LaBeouf in Fury, that World War II tank movie with Brad Pitt. But anyways, we want to kind of do a review of that interview.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Okay, I just looked him up. Sorry. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
What's the name? Do you have the name there?
Yeah, because he was also in like The Walking Dead as well, beginning.
Yeah.
I recognize this.
Shane, right?
Is it Kevin Campbell?
Nope.
No, that's the Real One basketball. Sorry. But anyway, yeah, I see the guy's name.
John Bernthal.
John Bernthal. Okay.
John Bernthal's Real Ones. But we wanted to review that interview because it's a little over 2 hours, and it's a personal friend of Shia LaBeouf. So Shia gets a lot more personal with him and talks a lot more about his not necessarily his actual conversion to Catholicism, but it definitely talks about his conversion in general to just a better way of living. There's a lot of vulgarity in it, so I don't necessarily recommend anyone watch it because it's just two modern dudes, good friends talking, so it's pretty vulgar. But we wanted to get into it just because of the interest that the interview with Bishop Barron had.
Did it sell you on the authenticity of his conversion,
It
one way
did.
or the other?
Even listening to Bishop Barron, I felt his conversion was authentic. I didn't think he was
All right.
putting it on right as some sort of act for
Agree.
the movie or anything like that. But
Yeah.
if you listen to just the Bishop Barron interview, it comes off the way he talks, and maybe it's just the words he uses, but it sounds like it was much more of an emotional conversion that he had at a hard point in his life while he was doing a movie about Padre Pio, right? Which,
Right.
if that's all it was, that's still amazing. Don't get me wrong. But in this interview with John Bernthal, he goes a lot deeper, right? And he talks a lot more about his time in AA and the struggles he was having in his personal life and some of the just amazing things that happened that at the time maybe seemed like coincidence that he now recognizes was God working in his life to get him to this place. So I really came away from that interview feeling like he has a much more solid ground in the faith than I thought he might have from just watching the Bishop Barron interview.
Okay.
I mean, he's talking to a good friend that isn't religious, so he tries to skirt around like actively pushing Catholicism on him, right? But from what he says, you can't help but see just the deep conversion that he's had. Not that it will necessarily last or anything like, I don't want to get hopes up because with celebrities, it always seems to go downhill in the end. But
Yeah.
I'm a lot more confident in it now.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to listen to it and tune into you guys because I agree. I didn't have any reason to doubt his conversion of the Bishop Barron interview. And on top of it, charity requires me to give him
You have
the
to assume
benefit
the
of the doubt.
best.
Yeah. So, the criticisms leveled against him would not have been leveled against him if he had not been such in favor of the traditional Latin Mass.
Yeah.
So,
And and he doesn't, this one, he doesn't talk about any of that because he's not talking to a Catholic. He's talking to
right.
someone else. But so Anthony and I plan on doing a show hopefully sometime this weekend on that. But that's all that we got coming up. Besides any live shows we do in Steubenville on October 7th.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun. Yeah, because we're what, a couple weeks away, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, something like that.
2 weeks from tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring. I have one of those Rebel cameras, like nice little camera, but I've also got a microphone for it.
Oh, okay.
So I thought about bringing that just to, even if we don't do it live with it, maybe I can put something together for our channels and stuff like that because that'll be fun.
Well, anything else before we sign off here?
No, that's all I've got. I've rambled enough.
Okay. Well, thank you for everyone who joined us for the live stream. Thank you to everyone who's watching at a later time. If everyone can please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, that would be absolutely great. And make sure you head over, subscribe to Jason and Mark over at Tradmen. Check out their latest videos, especially the one with Angela. Make sure you subscribe to Angela as well too. But anyways, have a good night, everyone, and thank you very much.